Hello again, welcome to Profiles on the UCF channel. I'm Ed Highland. Today, a musical interlude, a look into the creative music process. Our guest on Profiles is Dr. Stella Sung. Dr. Sung has been recognized as an American composer of national and international stature. Her works are performed regularly throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, and Asia. Dr. Sung is currently working on several commissioned music projects and is the composer and music coordinator of the documentary film The Groveland Four, produced by Log Cabin Films. In her spare time, she's a professor of music on the music faculty at the University of Central Florida. Welcome. I say in your spare time
Thanks,
almost
Ed.
with a little grin on my face because it doesn't sound like you would have much spare time.
Not
with
much
all the
spare
projects.
time. Not much spare time.
Let's talk a little bit first about the roots and get an idea of your musical roots, what's your background, and really how you got into going from the stage of performing to the stage of composing.
Well, I started piano when I was 6 years old. I have a little story about my piano. I started when I was 6, and I had this horrible piano teacher, one of those ones that took the ruler and hit him over your fingers.
Oh, the one we always hear about.
Yes,
Okay.
right. Well, I actually had one of those, and so I decided this was not going to work, and I told my parents I'm not going to take piano lessons. So then I went to ballet lessons. My parents thought that would be a better route. And I took ballet lessons for 2 years and had this disastrous ballet performance, which seemed, to me anyway, disastrous. And so it was back to the piano. And so I really started formal training at the age of 8 and really then started enjoying it a lot. Had a good teacher and pretty much decided I wanted to be a pianist by the time I was 12. It was at that point I just said, this is what I want to do.
And always classical pianist?
Always classical.
Okay.
I always sort of wish I could play other types of music, you know, at least well, but it's mostly classical.
Now, at what stage did the transformation, I'll call it the transformation, take place, where you were performing, and I believe you went all the way into college performing.
Absolutely.
Yes. And then you made the transition, decided you wanted to start concentrating more on composing. How does that come about?
Well, I finished my degree at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in piano performance, and had a very good 4 or 5 years there. And but I sort of felt it was time to look into some other things. So I went back to the University of Florida. I'm from Gainesville, so I'm a native Floridian, and started doing the degree in composition. I was still thinking of myself as a pianist and trying to do both, but I had relatively good success as a composer right away, actually, and not really thinking of it as success, just stuff that I enjoyed doing. And then I still felt that I wanted to be a pianist and pursue the piano teaching and that sort of thing. So I went to do my doctorate actually at the University of Texas at Austin, which is a wonderful school, and I have my doctorate actually in piano performance and not in composition.
Interesting. Okay.
But over the years, you know, life does things, and so I just found that composition was really what I wanted to do. And then I started teaching here at UCF, and the more I started teaching here and working with students, composition just evolved by itself.
And is that a different part of your, I guess as a person who's very limited in their musical talents, myself, it seems like it would be so different. It's one thing for me to pick up a sheet of music and look at that and say, here's what I'm attempting to perform. It's another to look at a blank sheet and say, okay, now I have to fill in the notes. Yeah,
the blank sheet is sometimes kind of scary because, you know, anything can come out, and it's all from whatever you decide. I guess my brain sort of switches from one side to the other. I still like to perform primarily chamber music. I don't do much in the way of solo piano playing, but they're related, of course, because you're making music in any case. But one is sort of the process after the process. That is, you're studying and performing something that has already been written and trying to bring interpretation and, you know, your own musical feeling and so on. The other part is the creation from the inside out. That is, you know, writing the music and then having someone else play it. So it's, I guess, two sides of the same coin in one way.
Do you sit and say, well, from 7 o'clock tonight until 10 o'clock tonight, I'm going to sit down and write some good music, or is it more inspiration based? I mean, you're sitting there and you're doing, you know, cutting the grass, for example, and say, oh, now I'm inspired and I'm going to run in and put this to the sheet.
Well, it's a little of both, actually. When I'm teaching over the day, it's very hard because I get there early in the morning and I do a full day of teaching, and then the work for myself comes usually late at night. So I burn the candle at both ends. And sometimes the inspiration comes just as you were mowing the grass, or I like to swim, so sometimes when I'm swimming or walking or whatever. But I don't have any prescribed set of time of day or so that I write. Some people do. For me, it's much more of a free type of thing. But once I get started on a project, I tend to focus in pretty heavily and just zoom in and do the work. And then I'm intense. Then it gets very intense.
Is it a help or a hindrance from the? We mentioned the fact that you are commissioned. There are people
Yes.
who admire your work, and rightfully so, and come to you and say, "I would like you to create something for me." Do they usually give you a subject, an idea, a concept that you are to build on, or is it more free form than that? And say, "I just like your work. Whatever you do is going to be great."
Well, it can be either of those. I did a work for the Orlando Philharmonic last year for their 10th anniversary season. So it was a very large-scale work. They gave me a free flow for whatever I basically wanted to do. But there was the idea that it should be somewhat celebratory in nature. I mean, they didn't want, some sort of funeral march for their anniversary season. So I knew that the sort of idea behind the piece would be something of a festive kind of nature. It turned out to be a really wonderful project, involved images from the Hubble telescope, and we had a wonderful reception for the piece. So sometimes those kinds of things are dictated to you. Other things, they can just be, just write a piece, and we give you maybe, a set time limit, let's say between 10 and 15 minutes, and then you can do whatever style or so that you choose. I think most people, if they commission a composer, they have some idea of what that composer's work is like. Now, it can change. I mean, it's always a gamble, because I could write something that they might not like at all. But generally, they have an idea of this style, and then it either suits them or not. And several years ago, I wrote a piece for the very famous cellist Yo-Yo Ma, and he plays all kinds of things, anything. And but the composition was for solo cello and cello choir, and it was a student choir, so it had 40 cellos of various levels. So it was a challenge. So I had kids that were very advanced and kids that were not so advanced, and then this wonderful star cellist, world famous cellist. So it was a real challenge for me to balance that and to write. So that set of circumstances was there, and I had to create the piece within that realm.
So it had all the intricacies, from the very simple for the less experienced student to
Yes.
the very complex for the more experienced, and of course the
Exactly.
master musician there as well. Fascinating. And we were talking one time about how there was one that was actually inspired by a color.
Yes. Well, I was asked to write a piece for guitar and piano and dance, and for a dancer. This is a project is still ongoing, although I've finished 3 pieces for them. And the request there was that I was one of 3 composers, and I was assigned a color. And the music was to somehow reflect this color. My color got to be red, which is a wonderful color because it can be fiery red or subtle red, but red has all kinds of, connotations to it, and ideas and so on. So that will be done sometime in November of, I think, next year, and we will be doing this with color as well as perfume.
So
So
the
it's
aroma
going to be
things get into it.
aromatherapy. So this should be interesting.
Well, that's a whole, and something we're going to discuss later in the program, but you're getting into, the obviously the sound portion of it, but also the visual
Exactly.
impact and the creativity there. And I guess now we're incorporating the olfactory as
Right,
well,
right.
and getting all of that. I think this would be a good opportunity to listen to a little bit of music, and we've got a videotape, and I want to tell everyone that's watching that I kind of caught you by surprise with this, in the sense that as you were saying, you don't really perform all that much anymore.
Right.
You compose, but if I'm giving away a secret, forgive me, but you said you don't practice that much anymore.
I don't have time to practice that much anymore. I try to, Ed, but it's hard. With teaching and composing, and I go from project to project. I have now projects up to 2006. So it's hard for me to find time to practice. But every so often I try to touch the piano.
So. I would think you would have to along the way, somewhere along the way, just to make sure the notes are in the right spot.
Still there.
Well, let's listen to the video. If you could, the song, the original composition was entitled what?
This is one of the piano part I was playing for the piano part of the Spirali number 2, which was for guitar and piano.
All right, let's give it a listen. And a wonderful composition, especially for someone who says she doesn't practice much.
Thank you.
Beautiful stuff there. And you know, that I think kind of launches us into the other facet of your brain, which is multifaceted here, is that you're getting into the electronic music as well, with also the visual impact that can be provided there. Tell us a little bit about that in your other studio that you have.
Right. Well, actually, this came about, the genesis of this came about maybe 5 years ago, where one of my students came and he said, I'm really interested in writing for film and video. And I've always had that interest as well, but didn't have a whole lot of time to develop it. But he started showing me some of the equipment in his studio and some of the modern electronic gear, as they call it. And so then I started getting more into it. I started thinking, gee, this is fun, this is interesting, and I really need to be able to do this because I think it's important for me as a teacher to at least have some idea of the many kinds of opportunities for students. And it's not always art music. Contemporary music involves electronic music, it involves many different styles of music and so on. So I sort of started getting into the electronic music, and over the years I've kind of built a studio, a home studio, which is now rather sophisticated. And I've been now doing a lot of work with digital media. We have a big project coming up and involving graphic artist, computer graphics artist, and myself, and we'll be doing also surround sound, 3D, as you were, 3D sound. So it's not just the stereo right and left kind of sound, but surrounding sound from above, below, behind, everywhere. So we want to experiment a little bit with the effects of three-dimensional sound. But I'm doing this using my electronic equipment. The sounds, the music that I'm creating, I have about maybe 80 to 90,000 sounds in my sound bank library in the computer, one of the computers. I have several computers, so I can draw them up using the programs and program them into that. So it's lots of fun.
Now, a lot of people say that's a huge leap from what we just heard a moment ago to getting into the electronic. And as you say, you've got 90,000 some odd sounds that are out there. You didn't say music, you said sounds.
Well, what's interesting is they are bits and pieces of what we call samples. And out of those samples, then one creates the music. So yes, there are phrases of songs, if you were, or little bits and pieces of music, but you sort of put them together to create a larger sound or larger sense of music and larger composition. So right now I'm also working on a new CD of mine, which I hope I can produce soon, a group of 12 pieces called under the title Karma, and it's all electronic music, and again to be mastered and made in with three-dimensional surround sound.
Okay. And so, would this be an adjunct to something that was visual as well? I mean, perhaps someone...
Well, yeah, it's interesting because as I'm writing this kind of music, I start to see visuals. I start to see landscapes in my head or whatever. And so the music tends to be visually oriented, even though there are no visuals with it right now. But one of the fun things about it is exploring that digital music realm and putting it together with another digital music realm, and then putting it together yet with another media, either computer graphics or something else, which is really fascinating, just fascinating.
Now, was this something that you had always done as far as seeing the image in your head as part of the composition process, or was it inspired by some of the commission artists like we were talking about before that are coming in and saying, well, I'm looking for something red?
It's been more recent. My earlier pieces are much more abstract. I didn't really think about visuals particularly, but I think now the more aware I've become of visuals by doing bits and pieces of film music or working with students who are doing film music and video and so on, I've become more aware of those things, and so I think it's been incorporated into my work more. So even with the piece that I'm writing now, which is a double violin concerto, it tends to be sort of cinematic in scope. I sort of see things now that I didn't really used to do. So
let's talk a little bit about the film. I mean, is that a unique experience? Is that the first one you've worked on?
Yeah, the Groveland 4 film was the first one I've done. It's about a 17-minute documentary. It was produced at UCF, and really interesting subject matter. to do with a racial incident that happened in the 60s.
And how do you come up with music to match a controversial subject like that? Again, is that the images in your head that?
Well,
or
it's
is
the
it from
images
the
what you
film?
see in the
Okay.
film, and then you try to create the mood, you try to capture the intensity, whatever's happening in the film. And it's a really wonderful project. I enjoyed it very much.
Let's switch back on the other side, because you do have some other, there's so many projects we can really just go on to different things. But one you've got that I know is close to your heart is there was a young violinist, I believe it was,
Yes.
who came and visited UCF, and I'll let you pick the story up from there.
Well, we have, this project is this double violin concerto, which I'm writing, and it's for a guest violinist from Kazakhstan. And she and her sister run a music school in Kazakhstan, in the capital there in Astana. And they were visiting UCF, and our conductor met them, and he brought them to my studio. And she doesn't really speak English, and I don't speak Kazakh. So somehow we got together, and we were able to communicate. And then our violinist on the faculty, Dr. Ayako Yanatani, also invited our guest violinist to her master class. And she did some playing, and I was just astounded by the playing. And so in my composer brain, I came up with this idea of doing a double violin concerto. And so it is happening, and as we speak, I'm busy working on that piece. And we will have a performance of it in spring, and then one in the fall of 2005.
And this is an international gathering, I guess you would
Yes,
say.
well, it's very interesting because we have this Kazakhstan violinist, we have our faculty violinist who's Japanese, we have our conductor who's Hungarian, and I'm Chinese American. So we've got this international group of people who are making music, and it's just great fun. One of the marvelous things about this, and this is one of those things where you think, gosh, this is really by chance or fate or whatever. When I was starting to write this piece, I went to the conductor and I said, you know, I think I'd like to incorporate some folk songs, you know, Hungarian, Kazakhstan, Japanese folk songs. And he said, you won't believe this, but I have a friend in Hungary who's a musicologist who is now currently collecting folk songs from Kazakhstan, Hungary, and Japan. And of all the combinations of possibilities, you know, it was amazing. So he faxed over about 20 pages of folk songs, of which I've used a couple in the piece.
And they just get interpreted into the grand scheme.
Right.
Fascinating stuff. And that is the springtime. We're looking, and the premiere will be at UCF.
Yes, it'll be at UCF April 14th and 16th of 2005, and then we'll go to Kazakhstan and do it there.
Sounds like a great opportunity for on many, many levels. And just in the closing moments we've got, you've raised so many different musical elements that are a part of your life. From the piano, we had a previous guest on Profiles, Eladio Sharon, who plays classical guitar, which you wrote a wonderful song for him. And we're talking about violins and viola, where we've got so many different instruments. Is it different? As a composer, do you have to set and get a different mindset for each type of instrumentation that you're going to be dealing with?
Yes, you do, because every instrument has different capabilities. So my job as a composer is to try and study the instruments. Of course, I don't play all of those instruments, but to study as much as I can of those instruments and work with the people who are playing those instruments to learn more about them. And you try to bring out what is best for those instruments and for those particular players. So it's always different, and that's the wonderful thing about composition. For me, people often ask me, why do you like composing? And really for me, it's the process and the work of collaboration. I really enjoy getting to know other musicians. I give them, some music, and they'll say, well, maybe, I like this or I don't like this. They don't usually say I don't like this, but they, might say, well, I'm not sure if that works well, And so it's really a wonderful unfolding process, and hopefully at the end everybody is and having a good time.
Do you ever start with violin and then say, you know, this would actually work better for guitar or piano?
Sometimes that happens. However, since now I really write only with commissions that I know pretty much, unless the players decide that they want to change instruments. But pretty much I know what I'm going to be dealing with now. So.
It sounds like there's a large and very full plate in front of you right at the moment.
Oh, lots of stuff. And you know, I love teaching, so I love sharing ideas with my students, and I learn from them all the time. So it's great to be at UCF and to do the work there, and I have wonderful colleagues. And I'm really very blessed in many ways.
Those moments of inspiration sometimes come during the classroom hours?
Well, they do sometimes, either when I'm screaming at somebody or when we're just talking through some things. And those are the moments that you live for, actually. You know, those moments when I'm sitting with a student and we're working on something and just, that's it.
So some of it may be student-inspired, would that be fair to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I hope I can do the same for them as well.
And there's no doubt about it on this side, that's for sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed.
Stella Sung. That brings us to the end of Still Another Profiles program. Our thanks to Dr. Stella Sung for her gift of music and bettering our understanding of music composition. Until next time, I'm Ed Highland for the UCF Channel.